The officer expected a routine stop. Expired taillight. Empty road. Long night. But when he looked at the man behind the wheel, a black school janitor in a worn uniform, his chest tightened. Because this face, this voice, this man once saved his daughter's life. Stay with this story until the end. Because what happens next will change how you see power, gratitude, and quiet heroes forever. Backhand Index Pointing writes subscribe for real stories where kindness always comes back around.
The street was nearly empty, washed in the dull orange glow of late evening streetlights. A quiet school building stood behind a rusted chain-link fence, its playground silent, swings unmoving. It was the kind of hour when the world felt paused, except for one tired engine rolling a little too slowly past the school zone. Red and blue lights flicked on. The old sedan pulled over without hesitation. Inside the patrol car, the officer exhaled, already bracing himself. Long shift, cold coffee, another stop that would probably lead nowhere. But procedure was procedure. He stepped out, hand resting near his belt, eyes scanning the vehicle like he'd done 1,000 times before. The driver rolled down his window. "I'm sorry, officer," the man said gently, before being asked anything. His voice was calm, worn but respectful. "I didn't realize I was still in the school zone. Long day." The officer studied him. Late 50s, maybe older. Graying hair tucked under a faded cap. Clothes marked with bleach stains and dust. A janitor's uniform. Creased, clean, but clearly old. His eyes were tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. "Where you headed?" the officer asked. Neutral but guarded. "Home," the man replied. "Just finished my shift at the school. 12 hours today." There was a pause. The officer glanced at the empty building behind them, then back at the man. Something about the contrast hung heavy in the air. The sharpness of a pressed uniform facing the softness of worn fabric. Authority versus labor. Power versus quiet endurance. The janitor kept his hands visible on the steering wheel. No sudden movements. No attitude. Just patience. Silence stretched between them. The officer felt it, that familiar, uncomfortable weight. The assumptions that crept in without invitation. The stories people told themselves in moments like these. He didn't voice them, but they sat there, unspoken, pressing down. "You work here every night?" the officer finally asked. "Yes, sir," the man said. "Have for years." The officer nodded slowly, eyes lingering on the man's face. There was dignity there. Not loud, not demanding, just steady, earned. As he turned back toward his cruiser to run the plates, he didn't know why. But something about this stop felt different. Like it wasn't just routine. Like this silence was holding a memory, waiting to surface. The officer leaned against his cruiser, radio crackling softly as he typed in the plate number. The night air was cool still, too still. From where he stood, he could hear the faint hum of the school's exterior lights and the distant echo of traffic blocks away. "Which school did you say you work at?" he asked casually, without looking up. "Lincoln Elementary," the janitor replied from the driver's seat. "Been there since they renovated after the old wing collapsed." The officer's fingers stopped mid-movement. Lincoln Elementary. The words landed heavier than they should have. He swallowed, a sudden tightness forming in his chest. He told himself it was nothing, just a name. Plenty of schools, plenty of memories attached to them. But then the janitor continued, unaware. "Hard place to forget," the man added quietly. "Especially after what happened that year." The officer slowly looked up. "What happened?" he asked, though something deep inside him already knew. The janitor hesitated, eyes drifting toward the dark school building. "There was an accident," he said. "Pipe burst in the old wing. Ceiling came down. Happened fast. Kids were still inside. The world seemed to tilt." The officer's grip tightened around the radio. The air felt thinner, like it had been pulled out of his lungs. He remembered. Years ago, before the promotions, before the gray hairs at his temples, before the badge felt heavier than it used to. He was younger then, still learning how to separate fear from duty. The call had come in frantic and broken. School accident, child trapped, possible collapse. He remembered how his heart had dropped straight to his boots when he heard the address. Because his daughter was in that school. The flashback hit him all at once. Sirens screaming through traffic. His hands shaking on the steering wheel. The way every red light felt like betrayal. He hadn't followed protocol. He hadn't waited for backup. He just drove. When he arrived, chaos ruled the scene. Teachers crying. Parents screaming names. Firefighters shouting commands over one another. Dust in the air so thick it burned his throat. And somewhere inside that building, his little girl. She'd been in second grade. Small for her age. Afraid of loud noises. He remembered tying her shoes that morning. Remembered how she waved without looking back. They told him a child was trapped near the old boiler room. Pinned. Panicking. He tried to go in himself. They stopped him. Held him back. Told him the structure wasn't stable. Then, over the noise, over the fear, he heard a voice. Calm. Steady. Hey, sweetheart. Listen to me. Not a firefighter. Not a medic. Just a man. I know it's dark, the voice said gently. I need you to breathe with me, okay? Slow. Like this. The officer remembered freezing, his heart pounding as he followed that voice through the rubble. It belonged to the school janitor. This janitor. The memory sharpened, becoming painfully clear. The man had crawled into the damaged wing before anyone else. No protective gear. No orders. Just instinct. He'd followed the crying, ignoring the cracking beams above his head. The officer remembered watching from a distance, helpless, as minutes stretched into eternity. Then he heard it. A child's sob turned into quiet breathing. I've got you, the janitor had whispered. You're not alone. He remembered when they finally pulled them both out, dust-covered, shaking alive. The janitor's arms wrapped around a little girl who clung to him like he was the only solid thing left in the world. His daughter. The officer's chest tightened as the present snapped back into focus. He looked at the man in the car again, really looked this time. The same voice. Softer now, older, but unmistakable. Sir, the janitor asked gently. You okay? The officer didn't answer. His hands were shaking. He turned away slightly, pretending to check the cruiser, but his breath had gone uneven. His vision blurred as the years collapsed into a single moment. That year, the officer finally said, his voice low, strained. You helped during the collapse? The janitor nodded slowly. Yes, sir. I was on night prep, but I heard the noise. Just did what I could. What child did you pull out? The officer asked, already afraid of the answer. The janitor's eyes softened. A little girl. Blue backpack. Pink sneakers. She kept asking for her dad. The officer felt his knees weaken. That was her. There was no mistaking it now. He stepped closer to the car, his badge suddenly feeling heavier than it ever had. That was my daughter, he said quietly. The janitor's face went still. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The streetlights buzzed overhead. Somewhere, a siren wailed in the distance. The janitor blinked, then smiled. Not proud, not surprised. I'm glad she was okay, he said simply. She was very brave. The officer swallowed hard, emotion rising fast and unexpected. This wasn't how traffic stops were supposed to go. This wasn't how power worked. He'd pulled over a man he didn't recognize. But time had just reminded him of something he could never forget. The night felt suddenly smaller, and the silence between them was no longer heavy with assumption. It was heavy with truth. The officer didn't realize he'd sat down on the curb until the cold of the concrete seeped through his uniform. The night felt distant now, blurred at the edges as the memory pulled him backward, past the flashing lights, past the old car, back to the day everything nearly broke him. The day his daughter almost didn't come home. The first sound the janitor heard was not screaming. It was silence. A deep, unnatural quiet that followed the crack of breaking concrete. He had been mopping the far hallway when the lights flickered and the floor shuddered beneath his feet. Years of working that building taught him the difference between harmless noise and real danger. This was the second kind. He dropped the mop and ran. The old wing had always been fragile. Everyone knew it. Warnings had been filed, repairs delayed, and now the ceiling had given in, pipes ruptured, water spraying like rain inside the halls. He smelled dust and rust and something electrical. Hello, he shouted, stepping over debris. No answer. Then, faint, broken, and terrified, he heard it. A child crying. The janitor didn't wait for instructions. There was no radio clipped to his belt. No supervisor nearby. No safety manual that covered moments like this. He just followed the sound. Each step deeper into the damaged wing felt heavier. The building groaned above him, beams creaking as if warning him to turn back. He ignored it. Fear was there, sharp and real, but came second, because the crying was getting louder. He found her near the boiler room, pinned beneath part of a fallen ceiling. Dust covered her hair. Her backpack strap was caught under concrete. Her small hands trembled as she tried to push herself free. She looked up at him with wide, panicked eyes. "I want my dad," she sobbed. He knelt beside her, careful, slow. "I know, sweetheart," he said gently, "and we're going to get you back to him. But first we breathe." "Okay." She nodded, barely. He placed himself between her and the cracking ceiling, shielding her without thinking. Every instinct told him the structure was unstable, that he should wait for firefighters. But every part of him that mattered refused to leave. He tested the debris with his hands. Pain shot up his arms as concrete scraped his skin. "It's going to be loud," he warned softly, "but you stay with me." Outside, sirens grew closer. Voices shouted orders. Somewhere beyond the dust and rubble, a father was being held back, begging to go in. The janitor didn't know that. He only knew this child was scared and alone. With one final pull, he freed her backpack strap and lifted her carefully into his arms. The ceiling groaned in protest. A crack split across the wall behind them. He didn't run. He walked, steady, protective, each step measured so she wouldn't panic. He whispered to her the entire way out, counting breaths, telling her stories about the school, about how strong she was. When they emerged into the open, the world exploded with sound. Firefighters rushed forward. Medics swarmed. Parents screamed names. And the officer saw his daughter alive. The janitor handed her over gently, making sure she was secure before letting go. He stepped back immediately, blending into the crowd as if he'd done nothing more than his job. But he didn't leave. He stayed. While medics checked her vitals, he sat nearby on the pavement, dust still clinging to his clothes. When she started crying again, loud, shaking sobs, he leaned over. "Hey," he said softly, "you're safe now." She reached for him without looking. So he held her hand. He stayed until her breathing slowed, until the shaking stopped, until her father was finally allowed close enough to kneel beside her. The janitor didn't introduce himself, didn't wait for praise. When the chaos settled and authorities took control, he quietly returned to the building's edge and picked up his dropped mop. The next day, he was back at work. Same hours, same halls, same quiet routines. He never told anyone what he'd done, because to him, it wasn't heroism. It was just a child who needed help, and a moment that demanded humanity. Back on the curb, years later, the officer pressed his hands to his face. All this time, he whispered, the weight of it crushing him. "I never knew." The janitor stood nearby, hands folded, uncomfortable with the attention. "You didn't need to," he said gently. "She was safe. That's what mattered." The officer looked up at him, eyes wet. "You ran toward danger," he said. "You saved her life." The janitor shook his head. "I did what anyone should." But the officer knew the truth. Most people run away, and some heroes wear janitor uniforms. The present returned slowly, like breath after a long dive. The officer stood beside the old sedan, the red and blue lights still painting the empty street in restless color. But the tension that once filled the air was gone. In its place sat something heavier and far more honest. He straightened, instinctively reaching up to adjust his badge. Then he stopped, not because of protocol, not because anyone was watching, but because for the first time in years, the badge didn't feel like authority. It felt like memory. He took a step closer to the janitor's window. His posture changed, not formally but visibly. Shoulders lowered, guard dropped. The power that once flowed effortlessly from uniform to civilian quietly shifted direction. His voice cracked before the words fully came out. "You saved my little girl." The sentence hung there, fragile and exposed. The janitor blinked, as if the words surprised him all over again. Then he gave a small, gentle smile. Not proud, not embarrassed, just kind. I'm glad I was there, he said. That's all. The officer nodded, swallowing hard. He felt foolish suddenly, remembering how the stop had begun, how assumptions had crept in, how easily he'd slipped into routine, into judgment, into the invisible distance created by fabric and title. He looked at the man again, not as a driver, not as a janitor, but as the reason his daughter grew up. You carried her out, the officer said quietly. You stayed with her. She still talks about that day, about the man who told her to breathe. The janitor's eyes softened at that. She was brave, he said, didn't stop trying, even when she was scared. The officer let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, but it broke halfway through. He turned his head, blinking fast, fighting emotion he hadn't expected to meet on an empty street. For years, he'd worn the uniform believing it made him the protector. Tonight reminded him that protection doesn't always come with a badge. Sometimes it comes with a mop in one hand and a child in the other. He glanced down at the citation pad, still untouched, in his cruiser. Slowly, deliberately, he closed it. No ticket, he said. The janitor nodded once, not relieved, just accepting. I wasn't worried, he replied softly. That stopped the officer cold. You weren't. The janitor shook his head. You were doing your job. The simplicity of the answer landed harder than any accusation ever could. The officer felt something inside him shift. Not snap, not shatter, but realign. Like a spine straightening after years bent the wrong way. He took off his cap, held it against his chest. It wasn't an official gesture. No training manual mentioned it, but it felt necessary. Thank you, he said again. Not just for her, for reminding me who really holds this place together. The janitor looked uncomfortable now. He shifted in his seat, glancing toward the school building behind them. People do what they can, he said. Some do it loudly, some quietly. The street fell silent again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was full. The officer thought about all the times he'd passed men like this without seeing them. All the nights janitors locked doors after teachers went home. All the unseen hands that kept the world from falling apart while others slept. You still work long shifts? The officer asked. The janitor chuckled softly. Someone has to clean up after tomorrow. The officer smiled, a real one this time. He stepped back, signaling the stop was over, but he didn't turn away immediately. Something told him this moment mattered, that it deserved to be held just a second longer. My daughter, he said, hesitating. She's in college now, studying education. The janitor's eyebrows lifted slightly. Is that so? She wants to work with kids, the officer continued. Says she learned early how much one calm voice can matter. The janitor looked down, blinking. That's good, he said. The world needs more calm. The officer nodded, then extended his hand through the open window. The janitor looked at it for a moment, surprised, then reached out and shook it. The grip was firm, honest. Two lives that once crossed in chaos met again in peace. When the janitor finally drove away, the officer stayed where he was, watching the taillights disappear down the quiet street. The lights on his cruiser still flashed, but they felt smaller now, because something deeper had been restored, something no citation, no command, no authority could ever replace. Respect, not demanded, earned, in silence. The officer didn't walk back to his cruiser right away. Instead, he crouched near the rear of the old sedan, studying the dim taillight that had triggered the stop in the first place. The plastic casing was cracked, the bulb flickering like it was tired trying. This won't take long, he said. Before the janitor could protest, the officer retrieved a small toolkit from his trunk, something he usually reserved for stranded motorists, not moments like this. He worked carefully, fingers steady now, replacing the bulb, sealing the crack as best he could. There, he said, standing up. It'll get you home safe. The janitor watched him quietly. You don't have to do all that. I know, the officer replied. But I want to. They stood there for a moment, the school looming behind them like a witness to both past and present. I'll follow you for a bit, the officer added. Make sure you get home all right. The janitor nodded, understanding the offer for what it truly was, not surveillance but care. The drive was slow, peaceful. Two cars moving through streets that felt softer now. When they reached the janitor's block, the officer flashed his headlights once, then turned away. No words were needed. Weeks later, the school hallway filled with a different kind of silence. Not the tense kind, the respectful kind. A small gathering stood near the front office. Teachers, a few staff members, the principal holding a simple plaque. No cameras, no speeches written to impress. Just truth. The janitor stood at the center, uncomfortable as ever. "This isn't about heroism," the principal said gently. "It's about showing up when it mattered." They didn't call the press. They didn't post it online. They simply thanked him. The plaque was modest. His name etched cleanly. A line beneath it that read, "For courage shown when no one was watching." He accepted it with a nod, hands rough from years of work. Applause followed, soft, sincere. That night, he went home and placed the plaque on a shelf beside old family photos and work boots worn thin with time. Life didn't change dramatically after that. He still worked long shifts, still cleaned empty halls, still locked the doors when everyone else had gone home. But something subtle had shifted. People looked up when he passed, not because of the plaque, because they knew. Across town, the officer sat at his kitchen table, listening to his daughter talk about her classes. She laughed easily now, confident, steady. "Dad," she said suddenly, "do you ever think about the man who carried me out?" He paused. "Every day," he answered honestly. She smiled. "I hope he knows I remember him." The officer nodded, throat tight. "He does." Later that week, he drove past the school again. Not on duty, just passing by. He saw the janitor through the window, sweeping the floor the same way he always had. Quietly, steadily. The officer didn't stop. He didn't need to. Some justice doesn't arrive with sirens or headlines. Some legacies aren't written in reports or medals. They live on in safe children, in calm voices, in dignity preserved, and in the quiet understanding that the greatest impact is often made by those who never asked to be seen. That night wasn't just a routine traffic stop. It was a reminder to see people beyond the uniforms, beyond the roles, beyond the assumptions we make in passing. A badge doesn't define courage. A title doesn't measure true worth. Sometimes the real heroes are quiet. They carry mops, keys, and courage in silence, never asking for recognition, never seeking applause. If this story touched your heart, like, share, and subscribe for more real stories where kindness, bravery, and humanity always find their way back. Because true respect isn't granted by power. It's quietly earned, and it lasts far longer than any title ever could.